Throwing this up before someone tries acting smart. Ask me who my favorite comic book superhero is. Batman? Nah, too many rabies. Spider-Man? I could squash him like a bug right now. Superman? Seriously? No, it's Stupendous Man! Friend of freedom, opponent of oppression, the Cadmium Crusader, the Friar of Schoolhouses, the moral victor, and considering all his arch-nemeses appear to be women, the based Giga Chad. In all seriousness, ask me what my favorite comic series is, and I'll tell you it's Calvin and Hobbes. Debuting in 1985 from cartoonist Bill Watterson throughout newspapers across the country, Calvin and Hobbes stars a precocious yet trouble-prone 6-year-old boy named Calvin and his tiger friend Hobbes, who is either an anthropomorphic animal or a stuffed toy depending on the perspective. I received my first book collection when I was 7, and the connection was instantaneous. The zany, imaginative artwork was appealing to a young kid, but the eloquent, verbose writing was what really sealed it as something special. At that age, I didn't understand half of its humor and vocabulary, but it stuck with me throughout the years, and now I realize the strip has only aged like wine. And what a lusciously fine wine it was. Not only was its commentary on academia, philosophy, politics, and human nature timeless and resonant, especially for a comic strip that only ran for 10 years in the late 20th century, but its writing, pacing, and themes cemented my own appreciation for the written word. It was also the inspiration for why I imitated nude descending a staircase when I was 9. There's a reason Calvin and Hobbes books disappeared from the house for a few years. I could make a whole separate video analyzing Calvin and Hobbes, but for now, let's focus more on the strip's cultural impact, specifically, memes. Although not as enduring as something like Peanuts, nor as notorious as something like Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes still commands an earnest visibility. This image of its title characters crossing a log has been redrawn and reimagined numerous times. Calvin referring to the Big Bang as the horrendous space kablooey has been informally adopted by scientists and professors. Calvin Ball, the sport where rules are made up as you go along, has become a political inside joke, even entering official Supreme Court records in August of 2025. And Tyrannosaurs and F-14 are still awesome after all these years. But of course, like any property, Calvin and Hobbes has its own dedicated fandom keeping its spirit alive in the current year. And perhaps the most unabashed segment of the fandom resides in a subreddit aptly titled okbuddyrosalyn. This, place is the central hub for Calvin and Hobbes meme edits, and its community has cultivated a very particular sense of humor that still finds its roots in Bill Watterson's creation. Running gags, ongoing storylines, and undiluted absurdity run amok here, yet it's well informed by the world and voice of Calvin and Hobbes. By the way, you're probably going to have to do a lot of pausing and reading in this video, so be ready. Much like r/loaded diaper, the subreddit offers fonts for users to faithfully recreate the original's dialogue. However, many edits eschew the original font in favor of deliberately mismatched substitutes. There isn't much in terms of other assets either, as users are keen to simply cut and paste different expressions and poses from pre-existing strips, sometimes to a Lovecraftian degree. All these, in my view, benefit the humor. Unlike the Diary of a Wimpy Kid LLBs, where users often attempt replicating the art style to a T, the disparate compositions of okbuddyrosalyn suggest an almost self-aware crudeness, as if the creator is hammering you over the head with how obviously wrong it's supposed to be. It's certainly a style that resonates with Calvin and Hobbes fans who grew up in our modern-day meme culture, but I think that's just a testament to how far-reaching the strip's appeal is. Personally, I find it admirable when a story or property is relatively timeless. Its humor or messages can be appreciated by anyone at any time, and the transformative antics over at okbuddyrosalyn are further proof of this. As mentioned before, the edits are often nonsensical, based in anti-humor, or dependent on community-curated running gags. Many of them require at least an intimate knowledge of Calvin and Hobbes to understand. For example, a canon strip featuring Calvin and his parents at a wedding was co-opted into the so-called funeral panel, used as the punchline for whenever a character dies in an edit. Heads are often swapped, characters are either replaced or flat out missing depending on the context. As you can imagine, the funeral panel certainly gets a workout. Naturally, part of the humor comes from the fact that Calvin and Hobbes fans recognize the original panel's context and just how unfitting it becomes. This unfortunate office worker named Frank serves as a token bullet sponge. Longtime fans will recognize him as the subject of Calvin's class report on overpopulation, where the roles between deer and humans are reversed. This man cannot catch a break, but he sure can catch a bullet. And I cannot explain to you why the word seafood makes me laugh, unless you are already aware of the strip that aired October 16th, 1986, where Hobbes proposes seafood as the point of living if we're all just going to die. Yet for a while, the subreddit saw a deluge of edits where the punchline was just seafood. And if you don't think that's peak comedy, then your gross club membership is officially revoked. Even Ronald, a character who was highlighted in a grand total of 1 strip, became the subreddit's unofficial mascot when an April Fool's joke required all users to submit edits featuring him. A sister subreddit was even made in his honor. It doesn't really get used anymore. On a broader note, Bill Watterson's penchant for funny sound effects found their way into edits, with ploop and sproing being common occurrences. This high art versus low art strip, as you can probably imagine, has fueled countless edits, with some being used to take jabs at other people or trends in the subreddit. And then some running gags were just weird, such as this one where a certain bodily secretion of Calvin's is revealed to be black in color. The original strip featured Calvin imagining himself as an octopus and spraying a fountain pen all over Susie. But of course you wouldn't know that just by looking at this dumbass edit out of context. The black semen jokes got so out of hand that the subreddit put a kibosh on them, to the point where even Rule 7, which bars explicit content featuring underage characters, has become a meme itself. When you hear the words Calvin black semen out of context, it certainly sounds awful. But for some reason, these edits never quite provoked the visceral response that the wimpy kid LLBs at their worst had. I think that's just a result of how crude and ridiculous the okbuddyrosalyn edits are by comparison. Few are trying to make a product that looks professional, and the black semen edits were no exception, so there's little chance of an emotional connection forming between reader and edit. At least that's what I tell myself so I don't enter watchlist premium. And oh my god, this subreddit is a goldmine for reaction images. I can't possibly show all of them in this montage, so I encourage you to seek out any gems I missed. Discussing individual edits and gags is one thing, but those that require a seasoned understanding of the strip's characters and themes and inside jokes merit special distinction. One of the most notorious Calvin and Hobbes strips of all time is the one where Dad delivers an unprovoked treatise on vinyl physics to Calvin, resulting in him going to bed exhausted and overwhelmed. I think we've all been Calvin at some point in our lives, or, coming full circle, become Dad in our later years. As expected, okbuddyrosalyn has frequent field days with this one. The most prominent riff consists of taking a broad concept, or list of concepts, and reducing them down to 2 categories, generally invoking the same sense of existential fatigue in the reader. Video games tend to receive the playing a record treatment, but pretty much any facet of life is vulnerable, and sometimes this formula is absolutely desecrated. I'm not sure if the meme started on the subreddit, as I've seen variations of this joke across the internet for at least a few years, but you can always count on the community to fall back on it. Dad's canon proclamations that unpleasant experiences build character have become almost a battle cry for him, and the very concept of character has become a meme itself, as well as another notorious strip where Dad hypes up Calvin over the promise of a very special time, only to reveal it's bath time, oh boy! Much to Calvin's chagrin. Dad will sentence Calvin to bath time, oh boy! Whenever he damn well pleases, which seems to be a magic spell that automatically transports Calvin to the bathtub. And other characters get in on the action too. Calvin's father has attained a sort of godlike status within the fandom, like a Matt from Wii Sports kind of figure. All-powerful with infinite knowledge, whose word becomes gospel on a moment's whim, wielding the blunt efficiency of a cold, unfeeling universe. Definitely one of those characters who could beat Thanos. Which checks out, as Dad's wisdom, fatherly platitudes, sarcasm, and almost inhuman go-getter attitude have made him an icon both in and outside the fandom. Bill Watterson managed to capture every exaggerated, almost sublime essence of fatherhood and roll it into one lanky, authoritative, yet slightly dorky family man. And all he had to do, apparently, was draw from his own father. On a less reputable note, Dad is frequently depicted cheating on his wife with the babysitter, Rosalyn. This dynamic became heavily exploited once Rule 7 got more rigorously enforced, as technically, Rosalyn's a high school senior. These same people probably subscribed to Rosalyn's OnlyFans the moment she turned 18. Changing subjects completely, when Calvin and Hobbes was still trying to find its footing, Watterson introduced a character named Uncle Max, who was the brother of Calvin's father. You might have spotted a problem already. Max appeared in a week-and-a-half-long arc in 1988, visiting the family from out of state. But because Calvin's parents were destined to remain nameless, it was difficult to write organic interactions between them. Additionally, according to Watterson, his presence did not bring out anything interesting or dynamic within Calvin or Hobbes. So when Max left the airport, he never appeared nor was even mentioned in the strip again. Naturally, Max also became an icon within okbuddyrosalyn. Due to the character's anomalous presence in the canon strip, and Dad's offhand comment about his potential criminality, Max has been reimagined as this mysterious entity who flits in and out of the family's lives, ranging from a minor annoyance to downright fiendish. From being the aggressor in a war against Calvin, to sleeping with his mother and cuckolding his father, to, let's just say the mustache isn't doing him any favors. It's no surprise that a character who was arguably conceived in error by Watterson would be reclaimed by the fandom in this ludicrous manner. It's almost like they're taking the piss out of him for even considering something like Max. You're gonna introduce this whole-ass character for a week and a half, then admit he was a mistake and never acknowledge him again? Fine. Then we're just gonna turn him into the bastard spawn of Judge Holden and Quagmire. With a mustache. Now let's talk about extended series within the community, for there are several. These creations are not only ambitious, but some do attempt to mimic the art style and humor of the source material, sometimes uncannily. Some have reached biblical proportions. Calvin the Eldritch Cultist went on for 500 entries. Definitely the newspaper comic equivalent of high schoolers writing novel-length fanfictions after school. Others commonly range between 30 and 50. I'll highlight a few that are my personal favorites. One noteworthy series with well over 100 entries follows Susie and Mr. Bun, canonically a stuffed rabbit who is never implied to be an anthropomorphic animal like Hobbes. Yet here, several early Calvin and Hobbes strips are reimagined with Susie as a protagonist and... oh god. Hobbes with his stripes erased and ears and whiskers added as Mr. Bun. Even more horrifying is how Susie's dad is portrayed. And here I was talking about how Max resembles a kitty fiddler. This man looks like a Franciscan monk moonlighting as a social studies teacher, who also touches children. Susie and Mr. Bun, despite filling the roles of Calvin and Hobbes, are fundamentally different characters from the two, something the creator is keen to note. Susie is more grounded and academically inclined than Calvin, qualities Mr. Bun likewise reflects. Out of context, an edit like this wouldn't make sense, unless you knew how the original played out. It almost becomes anti-humor. It's honestly quite clever. On the more serious side, a 7-day arc features what appears to be an alternate universe where Mom miscarries Calvin. Yeah, sorry to flashbang you with that. And, as a result of her grieving state, adopts Hobbes as her surrogate son. As heavy as the storyline is, it still employs a tasteful balance of dark humor and tenderness, something the original strip also did well. It's only near the end where we learn that this is a prequel AU, as Calvin is born in the final entry and Mom can see Hobbes as Calvin does, ending this brief but impactful series on a heartwarming note. Definitely a far cry from Black Seaman, but my all-time favorite extended series is simply called The Prequel. 7 strips ranging from 1955 to 1975, chronicling Calvin's parents growing up together and falling in love. Plus a storyline involving Calvin time-traveling back to 1955, getting his not-yet mother mixed up in time machine hijinks, and the convoluted actions taken by characters past and present to make things right and return to their respective years. This saga perfectly captures the tone and timing of the original strip, especially its occasional sweetness. Some of this imagery, despite not really being funny by itself, still makes me audibly laugh. And despite it appearing legitimate, part of the humor comes from, again, knowing exactly from which strips the creator sourced his artwork from. It takes an almost encyclopedic knowledge of Calvin and Hobbes to string together these combinations. Each familiar element is like a little Christmas light flaring in that part of my brain that's orange, black, and white. Finally, I'm not ashamed to admit I've made several contributions to okbuddyrosalyn. I just thought the place was very funny, and aligned with my sense of humor and appreciation for Calvin and Hobbes. As corny as it sounds, I feel like I found community there. And it's true that okbuddyrosalyn is not just an entertaining place, but an important one. Especially in light of recent events. As an artist, Bill Watterson was notoriously anti-selling out. In his search for a syndicate, Watterson turned down a deal that would have required him to incorporate a more marketable character named Robot Man into the strip, which was later passed on to Jim Memetic, morphing into the comic series Monty. When Watterson finally landed with Universal Syndicate, he refused to merchandise his strip, claiming it violated the spirit of Calvin and Hobbes and contributed to a trend of increasing commercialization within the comics industry. Watterson ultimately came out on top, and no official Calvin and Hobbes merchandise was ever produced. Although it was an exhausting struggle that contributed to a 9-month sabbatical and compelled him to lash out at his betters within the strip, Watterson would later claim that the only people who made money off of Calvin and Hobbes' quote-unquote merchandise were thieves and vandals. Watterson also leveraged his influence to negotiate for more artistic freedom in penning his elaborate Sunday strips, feeling that creative integrity overruled whatever economical restrictions newspapers applied to their comics pages. Several papers dropped Calvin and Hobbes in response, but Watterson believed the hit was worth it. To him, preserving his vision was more important than numbers. Calvin and Hobbes also stands out in that Watterson made the decision to retire the strip after 10 years, which compared to other series that continue to run to this day, really isn't that long. But Watterson felt he had done all he could with Calvin and Hobbes, and wished to end it on his terms with dignity, rather than see it become a decrepit pastiche of its former self, which ironically made the strip all the more memorable. It's safe to assume that Bill Watterson would look at okbuddyrosalyn and react with amusement and gratitude, even if he wouldn't understand the majority of its humor. I believe he would recognize that satire, especially of such a goofy, esoteric nature, is a particularly endearing form of flattery and tribute. But when it comes to Calvin and Hobbes as a property, attitudes have not proven charitable. In March of 2025, Go Comics, a primary provider of several newspaper comics, and a property of Andrews McMeel Universal, formerly Universal Press Syndicate, announced it was paywalling access to its content. Around the same time, the official Calvin and Hobbes subreddit, where users shared and discussed individual strips from the series, was hit with several DCMA notices courtesy of Go Comics. Unwilling to fight with a massive media conglomerate, the subreddit informally shut down, and a buzzing community that once saw dozens of posts and hundreds of comments per day devolved into a barren wasteland. Predictably, many of its users wound up migrating to r/okbuddyrosalyn, which has to this day remained safe from Go Comics thanks to its content's transformative nature. It's a contentious issue. On one hand, intellectual property and distribution rights exist for a reason, and copyright holders can do what they want with their content, within legal boundaries, of course. On the other hand, I also wonder what Bill Watterson would make of all this. A man who believed that the purest form of engaging with cartoons was creating and reading them, who turned down hundreds of millions of dollars and sacrificed his time, energy, and mental health for the sake of maintaining artistic integrity. Would he be okay with the thought of people reading Calvin and Hobbes when and wherever they wanted, for free? The idealistic side of me says he would be, and he would react with indignation at his former syndicate's actions. Whether he has the authority to enact change, or if he's even willing to go that far, however, is another matter. Watterson has publicly distanced himself from Calvin and Hobbes and pursued other ventures in recent decades, and is incredibly selective regarding interviews and statements and contributions. So it's unlikely we'll know his true thoughts on Calvin and Hobbes subreddits or Go Comics' crusade against unsanctioned reposts of his creation. And somehow, at least as far as he's concerned, I think that's okay. In a world where the media we consume is constantly locked behind paywalls or subscription plans by powerful faceless entities, the ability to celebrate it by making crude, nonsensical mock-ups is unparalleled. Even if you don't understand the humor, these edits ring with laughter, and the impetus for making them, really nothing more than because it's funny, speaks to the preciousness of creativity and community. It sounds weird to suggest that Calvin and Hobbes meme edits are a worthy representation of the human spirit. But people will go anywhere and do anything to find beauty and meaning. It's like the saying goes, there's treasure everywhere. Take care, everyone. I'll see you all next time.